Imagine a small house lost in the dusty countryside of Guanajuato. The air is thick, heavy, almost rotten. The police dig in the backyard, and what they uncover freezes everyone on sight. Bones. Not one, not two, dozens of them. The remains of women, young girls, even babies. All victims of a nightmare that existed in plain sight for more than a decade. And behind it all, there wasn't a cartel, nor a cult, nor a deranged killer hiding in the shadows. No, I do. It was something far more disturbing. Two ordinary women. Delfina and Maria de Jesus Gonzalez. The world would come to know them as Las Poquianchis, the deadliest female serial killers in the history of Mexico. And yet, almost no one remembers their names. Two sisters who seemed like simple, hard-working women. Bar owners. Smiling, polite, seemingly harmless. But behind that mask of normality, they built one of the darkest criminal empires the country has ever seen. An empire fueled by human suffering, by slavery, by blood. Their story begins decades earlier, in El Salto, Jalisco in the early 1900s. The Gonzalez Valenzuela sisters grew up in a house ruled by fear. Their father, Isidro Torres, was a former soldier turned chief of the local police. Ironically, the man who swore to uphold the law was the same one who planted the seeds of horror that would one day grow inside his daughters. He was violent, jealous, obsessed with the so-called honor of his family. His daughters weren't allowed to go out, to talk to men, or even to look at themselves in a mirror for too long. If he caught them wearing makeup or smiling at a stranger, he beat them mercilessly. There's a story that still circulates in Jalisco. One afternoon, when he found Delfina talking to a young man from the town, he locked her away for days without food or water. She survived, but something inside her died. That house, that cage of repression and abuse, didn't make them victims. It made them predators. They learned early that power comes from fear, that secrets are weapons, and that control, through manipulation or violence, is the only way to survive. So when they finally escaped their father's house, they didn't look for freedom. They looked for domination. By the 1940s, the sisters had moved to San Francisco del Rincon, in Guanajuato. At first, their business was almost legal. They opened small bars, cantinas where men could drink, gamble, and pay for a bit of company. They knew how to make money and how to stay out of trouble, paying the right cops, shaking the right hands, pretending to be respectable. But soon, they realized something. The real profit didn't come from selling drinks. It came from owning people. They stopped hiring women voluntarily. Instead, they began to recruit them through lies. They promised jobs as waitresses or maids, offering hope to poor young girls from rural villages. Others weren't even given that illusion. They were simply taken, kidnapped. Especially the orphans, the forgotten ones, the invisible ones. And so their true business was born. A network of human trafficking where women were not employees, but property. Sexual slaves forced to serve day and night, beaten into submission, trapped behind walls where no one could hear their screams. The sisters weren't just bar owners anymore. They were wardens. When they saw that no one dared to stop them, when they realized corruption was on their side, they decided to expand. They bought rural properties in Guanajuato and Jalisco, isolated ranches where the sound of the wind covered the cries for help. Those places looked quiet, almost peaceful from the outside. But inside, they were factories of suffering. They ran multiple brothels under false names, hiding behind bribes and influence. And to keep their empire alive, they needed a constant supply of young women. That's when they made a deadly alliance with local recruiters and pimps, men who would scour villages and towns, finding the desperate, the hungry, the hopeful, and selling them straight into the sisters' hands. Can you imagine how it felt to walk into one of their houses, believing you just found a job, only to realize you've been sold? Some women tried to escape, but those who did were beaten, starved, or simply vanished. Their bodies would end up buried under the same ground where the sisters later served drinks to soldiers and farmers. And here's the most chilling part. Nobody said a word. The police knew. The priests knew. The neighbors knew. But fear and corruption kept everyone silent. The sisters had built an empire so powerful that the line between authority and complicity disappeared. People whispered about the strange noises at night, the smell of burning flesh, the sudden disappearances. But when asked, everyone denied knowing anything. Because in those days, women disappeared all the time. And no one cared. The nickname Las Poquianchis came from a strange source, a popular radio comedy show that aired at the time. One of the main characters was called Poquianchis, a clumsy, silly figure meant to make people laugh. Locals started jokingly calling the sisters Las Poquianchis, not realizing how grotesquely fitting that name would become. It was an insult that stuck. But behind that nickname was nothing funny, only horror. Their story is not one of madness, but of control, of greed, of how two women scarred by violence became the architects of an empire of death. And the most terrifying question is, how many people helped them along the way? Think about it. Two women running multiple brothels, owning dozens of properties, moving money and people across states, all without anyone stopping them. Could they really have done that alone? This is where the story starts to twist into something darker. Because if you look closely, what Delfina and Maria de Jesus created wasn't just a crime ring. It was a system. A mirror of the corruption that still poisons societies today. Every police officer who took a bribe, every neighbor who kept quiet, every client who looked the other way, all of them became silent accomplices to a massacre that lasted more than 10 years. But here's what nobody expected. The empire didn't collapse because of justice. It fell apart because of a mistake. A small, almost accidental crack that exposed everything. Before we get there, though, you need to understand how deep this went. The sisters had perfected their method. When a woman arrived at one of their brothels, she was stripped, not just of her clothes, but of her name, her identity, her future. They were forced to take new names, to smile, to obey. Those who refused were tortured, beaten, starved. Some were buried alive. And yet, despite the horrors, life outside continued as usual. The bars kept serving drinks. The soldiers kept coming. The money kept flowing. And the sisters? They smiled. They danced. They even went to church. Because monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they walk among us, dressed like everyone else. When the police finally dug up their backyard years later, the truth surfaced, literally. Piles of bones, mixed with dirt and stone. Mothers and daughters buried together. A graveyard disguised as a business. But what's most disturbing is that their story isn't over. There are still unanswered questions. How many victims were never found? How many officials were involved? And why did it take so long for someone to speak up? Delfina and Maria de Jesus Gonzalez were not just killers. They were a reflection of a society that looked away. And maybe that's why their names faded into silence. Because remembering them means facing the truth. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles at you from across the bar. Now tell me, if you had been one of their neighbors, would you have spoken up? Or would you have stayed silent, just like everyone else? Leave your thoughts below, because what comes next in this story will change the way you see justice forever. Imagine a door that only opens one way. From the outside, it looks like work and safety. From the inside, it becomes a sentence you can never finish paying. That is how their system trapped entire lives without leaving a mark on paper. And yes, we are going to open that door today. But I warn you, what is inside will make you question who really kept the lights on in that empire. Local fixers brought them teenagers with promises or with force. Some were lured from markets and bus stops. Others were taken at night when a family could not fight back. They even bought little girls from households drowning in poverty. They spoke of school and good meals and uniforms. They promised a future. They delivered a cage. The machine was simple and cruel and always profitable. If a woman fell ill, she vanished. If a girl became pregnant, she vanished. If anyone resisted, she vanished. The yard swallowed the truth and silence did the rest. No forms were filed. No questions were asked. Money moved faster than morals. Authorities were paid off in envelopes and favors. Neighbors learned to look at the ground when a truck arrived. Those few who escaped knocked on doors that stayed closed. For years, the sisters lived protected by fear and by the comfort of people who preferred not to know. No one imagined that those quiet rural properties hid one of the largest clandestine cemeteries in the criminal history of Mexico. And if someone did imagine it, they chose not to say it out loud. Because in that town, silence was safer than truth. The capture system grew with precision. It mixed false hope with brute force. They posted fake job notices in poor villages. Domestic work, childcare, bar assistant, always the same promises. A decent wage, a bed to sleep in, a chance to help your family. When the girls accepted, they were transported to distant ranches. There the mask dropped. Their clothes and documents were taken away. Their names were replaced by debts that did not exist. They were told they owed for food, for room, for clothes, for transport. A debt that grew every day and never ended. Some were drugged the first night so they could not fight. Others were beaten until they learned the new rules. Obey. Smile. Do not ask. Inside those rural brothels, each day was the same winter. Tiny rooms without windows. Locks that clicked like a verdict. Many were kept in restraints or under watch. They were allowed out only to serve customers under constant eyes. Food was scarce and bad. Sickness spread in silence. Medical help was a rumor that never arrived. If someone could no longer earn, she simply ceased to exist in the ledger. A cost eliminated. Punishment was part of the schedule. Beatings for disobedience. Burns and humiliation for escape attempts. Cruel rituals meant to break the will without leaving evidence that could speak later. Some testimonies spoke of forced marches over shards. Others spoke of ice water and long hours without light. No gore was needed. The purpose was obedience. The result was despair. Pregnancies were common because the abuse was constant. Pregnant women were labeled useless. Many were forced into procedures in filthy conditions. Sometimes a newborn never left the property. Even saying these words feels heavy. But this is the truth survivors carried for years while no one listened. To the sisters, those girls were not people. They were inventory. Disposable inventory. Delfina and Maria de Jesus were the leaders. But they did not work alone. Two other sisters were involved. Carmen and Maria Luisa. Carmen supervised the young women and controlled the money. She was known for a cold heart and a precise mind. She kept strict counts. How many arrived? How many disappeared? How much each body produced? Maria Luisa participated less often but still played roles in administration and some recruitment. Together they formed a family business where affection was measured in income. Around them, a web of accomplices grew. Recruiters hunted in poor towns. Local police took bribes or collaborated directly. Corrupt doctors performed illegal abortions and provided sedatives without questions. Neighbors preferred not to see. Even some clients understood what was happening, and they kept paying. Do you see the shape of the monster now? It did not have one face. It had many. Ask yourself this. How many signatures does a crime need before it becomes a system? How many times can a door close before a city admits it is helping to lock it? Drop your answer in the comments. Because this is not just a story about two names. It is about the crowd that looked away. And yes, your voice matters here. Every comment pushes this case into the light they tried to bury. The sisters expanded with calculation. They preferred remote properties set back from roads where dust can cover tracks. They changed the names of their businesses often. New paint. New sign. Same rules inside. They rotated girls from one ranch to another so families could not track them. They kept ledgers in code. Initials. Dates that did not match. Amounts that spoke louder than any confession. They built loyalty the same way they built fear. Some employees were rewarded with better meals or a bed near a window. Some policemen were given free services and envelopes. Some local men were invited to parties with music and food. Everyone who tasted those favors felt a little more tied to the secret. Because once you benefit from a lie, you do not want the truth to arrive. In this middle of the story, the cruelty hardens. But there is something else that grows. The first hairline cracks. A rumor in a market about a girl who went north for work and never wrote back. A mother who visits the town again and again and is told to stop asking. A neighbor who notices the deliveries that always arrive at night. Whispers that never become statements because statements have consequences. Let us pause here. If you had lived in that village, would you have spoken up? Or would you have protected your family and kept quiet? I know it is a hard question, but answers change lives. Tell me in the comments what you think you would have done. No judgment, just honesty. The victims learned to survive in small ways. They created silent signals, a knock on a pipe, a piece of cloth tied in a hidden corner, a song hummed low to warn of a violent customer. Hope lived in fragments. Some held on to the memory of a brother or a mother or a child. Some promised themselves that if they ever saw a sunrise outside those walls, they would never stop talking. It is because of those voices that we know this story now. From time to time, the sisters staged charity gestures. A donation to a church repair. A basket for a family after a storm. They walked through town with their hair neat and their dresses pressed. They greeted police by name. They attended mass and nodded at the right moments. Monsters do not always growl. Sometimes they smile like neighbors. Customers came in uniform, and without it, farmers, travelers, men from other cities who knew exactly where to knock. Some were violent. Some were quiet and cruel. Some pretended to care while paying for pain. The house did not judge. The cash drawer did. If the numbers were high, the doors stayed open. When a girl broke down, they called it a problem of attitude. When a girl begged to send a letter home, they called it a security risk. When a girl refused, they called her a cost. The ledger did not have a column for tears, only for totals. I want you to remember this detail. It explains why the next twist was so shocking to them. Because in the end, it was not guilt that weakened the empire. It was a mistake in their own math. There was a night when a truck arrived late. New girls in the back. One of them had kept a scrap of paper hidden in her shoe. A name and a town, and the word cousin. Tiny letters. A thin lifeline. Later, that paper would surface in a place they never expected. Not because the girl escaped. Because greed makes people careless. As the operation grew, the sisters relied more on outsiders for recruitment. Those men wanted larger cuts. Fights over money escalated. A recruiter boasted in the wrong cantina. He flashed bills that did not match his job. A drunk challenge turned into a scene. A policeman heard a fragment that did not sound like a normal quarrel. It sounded like business that should not exist. He took the information and sold it to a higher bidder. Information has a price, and sometimes it has a conscience attached to it. At the same time, a young woman in a nearby town survived long enough to reach a midwife. She spoke in pieces between fevers. She named a color of a gate. She described a bell that rang at sunset. Small truths that could be ignored alone. Together they looked like a map. But no one wanted to draw it. Because drawing it meant action. And action meant war with people who had friends in uniforms. This is where the tension thickens. Money was still moving. Bribes were still being paid. But attention began to flicker where it had been blind. A new official arrived who had not yet learned the old rules. He filed notes his predecessor would have burned. He asked for ledgers that were not supposed to exist. He did not know that people in that region preferred their paperwork thin. And his questions pressed on the thin places. Meanwhile, inside the houses, the routine tightened. Curfews shortened. Punishments increased. Inventory was moved faster between properties to keep anyone from building a pattern. Some girls were told they would be transferred to a better place. Many vanished along the road. The ledgers became messier. Numbers scribbled over numbers. Names turned into initials. Dates slipped. And in a system that worshipped control, those tiny errors were the beginning of the end. I want you to take a breath here. Because the next episodes will be hard and necessary. They will also show how a single thread pulled at the right time can unravel a machine that looked eternal. So if this story is gripping you, share it. Like the video so the algorithm does not bury it. And tell me in the comments what details shocked you the most so far. Your reactions help bring the hidden into daylight. Back to the web of accomplices. Some policemen were not just passive. They were users of the services. They were guardians of the gates. They warned of inspections before they happened. They escorted shipments under the excuse of night patrols. In exchange, they received cash, entertainment, and protection when things got loud. The sisters kept a list of favors owed. That list was worth more than any safe. Doctors provided more than procedures. They supplied medications to keep girls awake when exhaustion set in. They offered false certificates when someone asked questions. A cough became a minor cold on paper, even when it was pneumonia. A bruise became an accident with a door. Everything could be converted into something ordinary if the signature was pretty enough. And every pretty signature bought them another month. Recruiters were paid per head. They watched schoolyards and marketplaces. They followed rumors of a girl looking for work. They studied which families could be pushed with a few bills. They learned which bus routes were quiet after sunset. They learned the value of a smile that promised opportunity. They learned the price of hope. Then they sold it. While the world celebrated festivals, the houses stayed busy. Music from town drifted over the walls. Inside, the girls listened and counted the days. Some marked time with scratches. Some with prayers. Some refused to count at all. Because counting can break you when the end has no number. If you have ever felt trapped, even for a season, you know a fragment of this. Leave a heart in the comments for those who made it out. They deserve to be seen. Carmen kept balance like a banker. She knew which house needed new paint to look legitimate. She knew which official preferred cash on Fridays. She knew how to set prices so the room stayed full, but the girls stayed hungry. Hungry people do not make plans. Hungry people obey. She carried a small notebook everywhere. People thought it held recipes. It held revenue and shadows. Maria Luisa moved more quietly. She took messages between properties and confirmed deliveries. She handled supplies and clothes that could be reused. She hired laborers for fences and wells and never let them see the back rooms. If a worker asked too many questions, he was dismissed. If he asked again, he was not seen. The rules were simple. Do your job. Forget what you saw. The myth says evil announces itself with thunder. But here it sounded like keys on a ring. It smelled like strong soap in the morning. It looked like a clean counter and a ledger balanced to the scent. That is why people did not run. They did not see a monster. They saw a business. And the business was good for the ones who mattered. The cracks kept widening. A client recognized a girl from a neighboring village. He asked a question he should not have asked. He left hurriedly. He told someone after too much drink. 3 days later, his shop window shattered. He stopped asking questions. But the story he told kept walking from ear to ear. Stories are like water. You can block them today. Tomorrow they find another path. If you are still here, you are part of that path. You are helping a story move where it could not move before. So comment with the word light if you want part 3. That is how I know you are one of the people who refuse to look away. Inside the empire, the sisters began to suspect they were being watched. They held meetings behind closed doors. They tested their own guards with planted rumors to see who talked. They sent small gifts to the families of certain policemen. They reminded everyone what could happen if loyalty wavered. They spoke of loyalty as if it were love. But what they meant was fear. And here's the twist that will lead us toward the collapse. One employee had kept a second set of notes hidden in a place no one searched. Not for love of justice. For survival. He planned to trade those notes if the winds changed. Pages with dates and first names and numbers that did not match the official ledger. Pages that showed how the debt scam worked. Pages that could turn whispers into statements. The moment to use them was approaching. This is where we end our middle chapter. The machine is still running. The houses are still full. The money is still flowing. But the errors are stacking. The favors owed are coming due. And a single notebook is about to decide who walks free and who never leaves the yard. If you want the final chapter with the fall, the arrests, and the unanswered questions that still burn, write the word justice in the comments. Like this video so the platform shows it to more people. share it with someone who needs to know that silence is never neutral. And stay with me, because the next part will reveal the mistake that brought an empire of darkness into the sun. In the world of Las Poquianchis, death wasn't an accident. It was business. Cold, methodical, predictable. Every scream, every disappearance, every grave, all part of the system that kept their empire alive for more than a decade. They didn't need weapons of war. Their power came from fear, money, and silence. And those three things together can protect monsters better than any army ever could. The rules inside their world were brutally simple. If a woman got sick, she was gone. If she grew too weak to work, she was gone. If she tried to escape, she was gone. And if she stopped making money, even for a single day, her life became worthless. The methods they used were terrifyingly practical. Some victims were poisoned, their food or drinks laced with chemicals that burned from the inside out. Others were beaten to death as punishment, their screams used as a warning for everyone else. Some were strangled quietly in the night, others executed in the open backyard, not as punishment but as a reminder. For Las Poquianchis, murder was management. Their victims were buried in improvised graves, shallow pits dug into the dry soil of their rural properties. When the graves filled up, they started using old wells. When the wells filled, they began to bury the dead under the floors of newly built rooms. Every expansion of their business literally stood on bones. Years later, when police records were finally compiled, investigators documented not just adult women, but teenagers, little girls, and dozens of unborn babies, the result of forced abortions and constant abuse. The magnitude of the horror was almost impossible to process. It took weeks for the authorities to recover all the remains found in just one of their ranches. The sisters had turned death into routine, a simple step in the cycle of money, fear, and silence. But then, after years of darkness, something unexpected happened. A girl decided not to die quietly. Her name was Catalina Ortega. She had been captured the same way as so many others, through lies. A promise of honest work. A chance to help her family. Instead, she found herself imprisoned, abused, and forced into the same endless nightmare. But Catalina was different. She didn't surrender. She watched. She listened. She learned the guards' habits, their patterns, the moments when fear turned them careless. And she waited. One morning, when a door was left unlocked for a few seconds too long, she ran. Barefoot. Hungry. Terrified. Across fields of dry earth, through thorn and dust, chased by the ghosts of those who couldn't run. But Catalina didn't stop. She knew that if they caught her, her death wouldn't just be punishment, it would be a message to everyone else. And still she kept running. When she reached the nearest town, bleeding and trembling, she went straight to the police. She told them everything. The kidnappings, the torture, the graves, the screams. And do you know what happened? They didn't believe her. The same corruption that had protected Las Poquianchis for years now silenced Catalina's words. To them, she was just another poor girl with a wild story. And yet, Catalina didn't give up. She went from town to town, telling her story to anyone who would listen. Priests, local officials, even journalists. Most turned her away. Some mocked her. But she didn't stop. Until finally, she met an officer, one man who decided to listen. He looked at her, saw the scars, and believed. That small act of faith would ignite one of the most shocking investigations in Mexican history. It was 1964 when the quiet towns of Guanajuato and Jalisco would finally learn what had been happening right under their noses. After multiple testimonies and weeks of discreet surveillance, the police organized a secret operation to inspect the sisters' properties. One of the main targets was a ranch infamously known among locals as El Infierno Grande, the Great Hell. The name, as it turned out, was no exaggeration. When the officers arrived, the air was heavy with decay. They began digging behind the house, and within minutes the first bones appeared. Then another. Then another. What they found was not a single mass grave, but dozens of burial sites scattered across the property. Bodies of young women, teenagers, and even babies. Some tied, some showing signs of brutal blows, others clearly shot or strangled. Every few meters, a new corpse. The stench was unbearable. Officers had to cover their faces with cloths soaked in alcohol just to keep working. And the deeper they dug, the worse it became. 80 bodies. That's how many were recovered from that single ranch. 80 stories. 80 lives erased. And that was just the beginning. As the operation expanded, more ranches were inspected, each one revealing more graves, more bones, more evidence of a nightmare that had gone unseen for over 10 years. Inside the houses, investigators found rooms with no windows. Makeshift cells with chains and locks. Crude instruments of torture. And perhaps most chilling of all, notebooks. Ledgers. Detailed records written in neat handwriting, tracking the women like inventory. Names. Ages. Deaths. Dates of disappearance. It was all there, organized, efficient. The paperwork of death. Can you imagine reading a page that lists someone's name next to the word terminated? Because that's exactly what those records contained. For the police, it was like stepping into hell, a hell that had been operating in plain sight while everyone turned away. The horror became front-page news overnight. For the first time, Mexico saw the true scale of what these two sisters had created. But here's what most people never hear about. Even as the investigations continued, many officials tried to cover it up, to downplay the story, to make it sound like an isolated tragedy, not a reflection of how deep the corruption really went. Because Las Poquianchis didn't work alone. They thrived thanks to the people who protected them. The ones who took bribes, who stayed quiet, who thought that turning a blind eye was harmless. That's the real horror. It wasn't just two women. It was a society that let them exist. When the sisters were finally arrested, they didn't cry. They didn't beg. They didn't even seem surprised. As if, after all those years, they knew exactly how this would end. Some say Delfina smirked when the officers read her rights. Others say Maria de Jesus just stared at the ground and muttered something like, "It was only business." And maybe that's the most terrifying sentence of all. Because for them, it was business. Every death, every lie, every ruined life, just another transaction. When the press tried to count the victims, the numbers kept changing. 80 here, 100 there. Some say the true total was closer to 91 bodies found. Others believe it exceeded 150 across all properties. No one will ever really know. Too many of the dead were never even identified. The sisters' arrest marked the end of an era of silence, but it also exposed something deeper, something still relevant today. How far can corruption go before it becomes part of everyday life? How many people have to look away for evil to grow roots? Tell me in the comments, what do you think hurts more, the cruelty of the killers or the silence of the people who knew? Because this story isn't just about the past. It's about the kind of world we create when fear wins. Stay with me. In the final part, you'll see what happened to the sisters after their empire fell, and the haunting legacy they left behind that still echoes through Mexico's history. Don't miss it. Like this video, share it, and get ready for the shocking ending of Las Poquianchis, the Sisters of Death. The day the police finished digging, there were no words left. Reporters arrived expecting a crime scene, but what they found was something else entirely, a slaughterhouse disguised as a brothel. Mexico had never seen anything like it. When the first headlines hit the newspapers, the country froze. People couldn't believe that something so monstrous had existed for so long, in plain sight, while everyone looked the other way. The Sisters of Death unmasked, one headline read. Another said, the house where innocence was buried. The world was horrified. And yet the true horror wasn't only in what they did, it was in how easy it had been for them to do it. Las Poquianchis, Delfina and Maria de Jesus Gonzalez, were arrested along with several of their accomplices. Their trial became a national spectacle. Courtrooms were packed with journalists, survivors, and people desperate to understand how two women could orchestrate such a nightmare. Throughout the hearings, Delfina and Maria de Jesus showed little to no remorse. They laughed with each other, whispered jokes, and occasionally pointed fingers, blaming one another to lessen their sentences. The coldness in their eyes terrified even the officers standing guard. Survivors took the stand and told stories that shattered the courtroom silence. They spoke of beatings that lasted for hours, of girls who disappeared overnight, of forced abortions, hunger, humiliation, and torture. Some could barely speak, their voices trembling under the weight of what they had survived. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: bones, accounting ledgers, tools of torture, and endless documents showing years of systematic abuse. The defense tried to claim insanity, to paint the sisters as mentally ill. But the mountain of proof crushed that argument quickly. In 1964, the court announced its verdict. Delfina and Maria de Jesus Gonzalez were sentenced to 40 years in prison, the maximum penalty under Mexican law at the time. 40 years for hundreds of stolen lives. Justice, yes, but incomplete. The case didn't just horrify the country. It also tore open the mask of corruption that had protected the sisters for so long. Police officers, doctors, and local officials who had accepted bribes suddenly found themselves exposed. For years, they had traded conscience for money, and the cost had been measured in human lives. After their conviction, Delfina and Maria de Jesus were sent to separate prisons to serve their sentences. But even behind bars, their story refused to rest quietly. In 1968, only 4 years after her arrest, Delfina met a death as shocking as her life. She was supervising construction work inside the prison when, from high above, a worker accidentally dropped a bucket of wet cement. It fell directly on her head. She died instantly. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered it was revenge, a final act of justice from someone who had lost too much to her cruelty. Either way, her reign ended not with a scream but with a thud, sudden, brutal, poetic. Maria de Jesus lived longer. She spent decades behind bars, isolated and forgotten. With each passing year, her health decayed, her mind followed, and her name disappeared from the headlines. When she died in 1990, she was completely alone, a shadow of the woman who once commanded terror. No one claimed her body. No one visited her grave. The other sisters met their own fates. Carmen Gonzalez died soon after being arrested, before her trial even began. Maria Luisa managed to avoid prison for a while, but her life became a slow, lonely exile. Rejected by society, she faded into anonymity, dying in obscurity, another ghost swallowed by the shame of her family's legacy. Decades later, Las Poquianchis faded from public memory. Their names became whispers in the dusty corners of Mexico's criminal history, overshadowed by newer scandals and modern violence. But for those who know their story, Delfina and Maria de Jesus remain the chilling faces of human cruelty. They remind us that monsters don't always come from nowhere. They're made. Because the truth is, Delfina and Maria de Jesus weren't born killers. They were born into violence, raised in a world that confused fear with discipline, obedience with worth, and silence with safety. Their father's fists taught them that pain equals control. Their society taught them that money equals respect. And little by little, cruelty became normal, not just for them, but for everyone around them. That's the part of the story people often miss. Las Poquianchis didn't rise in a vacuum. They were products of a corrupt system, of poverty ignored, of women treated as tools. They didn't invent evil, they industrialized it. For more than 10 years, women and girls were turned into merchandise. Used, broken, discarded, and buried as if they had never existed. And it all happened not in a distant war zone, not in some lawless wilderness, but in living, breathing communities, full of neighbors, teachers, priests, and officers who preferred to stay silent. Even today, the ranches where they ruled still stand, or at least what's left of them. Crumbling walls, empty ruins, wind blowing through broken windows. But beneath that soil, under the weeds and dust, lie the echoes of screams that refuse to die. They're not tourist attractions. They're reminders. Because the real horror of Las Poquianchis isn't what they did. It's what everyone else allowed them to do. It's how greed, corruption, and dehumanization can twist ordinary people into monsters. It's how silence becomes an accomplice. And maybe that's the message we should remember today. That evil doesn't thrive because it's powerful. It thrives because it's tolerated. So when you hear stories like this, don't look away. Don't forget the names of the forgotten. Don't let silence win. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments, what do you think is the most terrifying part of this story? Is it the murders or the indifference? Like this video so more people can hear the truth that history tried to bury. Share it, not to spread fear, but to honor those who never had a voice. Because every view, every comment, every whisper of remembrance keeps their memory alive and reminds us that the true monsters are never just the killers. They are the ones who stop seeing others as human. And that, in the end, is the darkest story of all.